Hello world, welcome to a Champions Online guide. Today I'm going to go over the Marksman, which is a ranged damage dealing character that uses bow and arrows. It's one of my favorites because rain of arrows. Yep, that's right, a single power, that's pretty awesome. Although, explosive arrow with Withers the Kaboom is pretty awesome too, which is why I use rotation with just those two powers. That and because I have a lazy playstyle. Kevin PoHo fight is actually pretty easy. The biggest reason is because you have 100-foot attacks and he only has 50-foot attacks. And another thing, you can move while attacking. I don't think there are any archery powers that root you while attacking. Even Rain of Arrows, which is a maintain, lets you move, which is awesome. So run circles around Kevin PoHo at 100 feet and shoot him in the face with lots and lots of arrows. For leveling, Straight Shot and Sonic Arrow are fine, although the real highlight for me was Torrent of Arrows, especially with Relentless Recurve. You could simply go up to a mob, fully charge it, and just splatter everything. It was hilarious. And sometimes things went flying too, which can be annoying in a group, so I would be careful about using Relentless Recurve while leveling if you do a lot of alerts. By level 40, I normally only use Torrent of Arrows on tap for the knockback, and even on tap, at rank 2, it's pretty powerful, so it's not useless. Straight Shot has a built-in debuff that lets you do a little bit more damage with your archery powers. There's also an advantage that lets you have this extra damage a few extra shots, so even if all you do is tap Straight Shot and then use other powers, it's good for a rotation. And I used to use it in my rotation until I just got lazy and was like, you know what, my Rain of Arrows has a really low cooldown and I can get away with using just Explosive Arrow and Rain of Arrows. And that's exactly what I did, because lazy. Especially since I did my spec trees around using Rain of Arrows. I don't think this is the normal build that people would go with, but I just really like that power, so I built around it. Once I hit level 40, I actually decided to gear up this archetype properly instead of just getting trash from the auction house. Mostly because I think I'm going to keep this one just in case I want to use it to farm up like Justice Gear tokens or something. This is a pretty good archetype to use it with. I farmed up all of the Justice tokens I already have with archetypes, and I think this one is a solid choice if you want to go into something like Gravitar. Yes, it doesn't have a self-heal, but I have taken an archer into Gravitar without an elixir, with just the healing patches, and done alright. It does require probably a lot more hiding. You have to have heavy reliance on your vendor healing patches, which kind of sucks, especially if there's no healer and there isn't always someone to heal you. But it will work out as long as you pay attention and have at least 7,000 health. I would say 7,000 is the minimum health you need to survive Gravitar properly. As for gear, I went with the defensive plate that gives extra health, so instead of defense like I would normally go with, my character is essentially pushing around 8,000 health right now, which I think is pretty good for not heavily investing in Constitution. And then I also have 2 Constitution mods, which is nice. Since this is an archetype, I have no plans to fully deck it out with Legion or Justice gear, but this character will be pretty good if you decide to keep it and invest in it. Even just having Elixir is amazing. For a long time I had Sturga as a marksman, and she has full Legion set and Vigilante gear, and of course a few fancy devices like Elixir and the Flesh Graft. They were great. I could take quite a bit of damage and pretty much destroy things. It does partially depend on your team keeping up with you, but the damage and the survivability is fairly good, even without a healer. I took this character, Sturga, when she was a marksman through Warlord, and could survive getting hit in the face with flame patches, and as long as I blocked and walked out of it, I could live through them and keep taking these things to the face and moving around, so it works out well. It's a great option if you really like the Marksman, and I would probably suggest if you intend to take the Marksman through rampages to pick up Focus Shot, especially if you want to do Fire and Ice and not have to worry about is the tank on Frosty good or not. I took in my Soldier, which has Sniper Rifle, which is the same 120 foot power. You do have to be very careful to be almost exactly at 120 feet. Like, you fly above Frosty, and then you inch down, you select him, and then you inch down until you are just in range for Focus Shot. Because if you are too close to 100 feet, he will hit you anyway. And that way, if you're like in a pickup group or you are not confident and you don't know the tank that's on Frosty, you won't have to worry about getting one shot. Because even with 8,000 health, you will probably die in one shot of Frosty's Ice Daggers. If you don't intend to do rampages, or you intend to always go with the pre-made where you know the Frosty tank is good and can keep aggro from you, then I would not use Focus Shot ever, because it's not even as good as the Soldier's counterpart. Other things I did, I stopped using Straight Shot and Sonic Aero at level 40. I also just stopped using Snapshot. It's not that it's a bad power, I don't really want to have a large rotation. I made my character's stats to revolve around Rain of Aero, so that's what I use most of the time. And even though it has a cooldown, I can get away with Rain of Aero and Explosive Aero exclusively, because that's how fast the cooldown for Rain of Aero is, which is a benefit of single-statting Intelligence. I don't know if I would recommend it. Ideally, I would say try to make it so that your character does not have to stay within 50 feet to use your energy builder ever, which means using a little bit more ego for Hunter's Instinct. Concentration stacks with Intelligence, but Hunter's Instinct does not. And I would say it's important to go with a little bit more crit chance, which means a little bit more EO, just to take advantage of Hunter's Instinct. I would not go with offense gear or the offense passive that gives crit chance in the dexterity tree, because frankly I find it disappointing. I would go with crit gear. You don't need to go with severity, because with dexterity, mastery, and dexterity as primary super stat, you get all of the severity you need. You'll have over 100% easily. My character has 108%. Usually I shoot for 100%. Anything too much over 100% severity, you're going into diminishing returns fairly heavily, so I would avoid that. But 108 is pretty good. Pros for this archetype. Rain of Arrows. Yes, I know it's called Storm of Arrows, but I like Rain of Arrows because that's what it's called in every single other game I've played with it ever, so I call it Rain of Arrows. And of course, Explosive Arrow with Where's the Kaboom is awesome. You can simply tap it, and you'll get the full benefits from Where's the Kaboom without having to go rank 2. However, because I like a lazy playstyle, I use rank 2 of Explosive Arrow and use it as my main attack when I'm just, when I'm in something like Lemuria Invasion and I need to kill the flying bugs. Well, okay, they're vehicles, but they pretty much look like bugs. Anyway, I use Explosive Arrow and just tap that to hit whatever, instead of using like Snapshot or Straight Shot. Ideally, you probably want to go with like Straight Shot would be good for the rotation for the debuff, but I don't care about that, so I just went with Rain of Arrow and Explosive Arrows, which are both really awesome. You actually have a good stat selection to have a glass cannon damage dealing tune, so I'm actually pretty happy. I mean, obviously Constitution would have been a good choice, but for its role as DPS, Dexterity, Intelligence, and Ego are fantastic selections. Even the talent tree is good. I mean, you get Dexterity, Mastery, and Avenger, and Guardian. It's obviously not as... It doesn't have, the survivability of your Wardicator or Guardicator trees, but it's still a good choice. Especially since I went with Rain of Arrows as my main attack. I have things like Round 'em Up and Relentless Assault, which pretty good for maintains and area effects. Although if you don't want to specialize in Rain of Arrows, you want to go with like the traditional Straight Shot or Snapshot, you can do that too with the Avenger tree. You just don't take Round 'em Up or You wouldn't take Random Up or Relentless Assault because Rain of Arrows is your only maintain. But the Avenger tree gives you that flexibility as well. And of course you have Exposed Weakness, which gives you a little bit of damage penetration, which is just pretty much really awesome. And Quarry is a great passive. Quarry and Evasive Maneuvers are two of those powers that are cherry-picked in so many freeform builds. Quarry is an excellent ranged physical damage passive, even though dodge isn't as good as it used to be. It's not, ridiculous anymore. And Evasive Maneuvers is good for aggro control. You have a 50% chance of going into stealth and dropping all of your aggro, which is great. I mean, the only other aggro wipe you have is death, which means you're not doing damage, so that sucks. One thing I love about the Marksman is that you have freedom of movement while attacking. Even while channeling Rain of Arrows, I can move around all over the place. It's great. All of your powers are 100 feet, which is also great because you don't really have a whole lot of survivability. You don't have Constitution as one of your super stats. And Quarry, even if you build around dodge, is not amazing for survivability. Although if you choose to go with a lot of defense like I do, you can still have pretty high defense even with Quarry. And then of course you still have the dodge and avoidance from Quarry on top of it, which is great. You actually have quite a few good defensive options with the Marksman. You have Relentless Recurve on Torrent of Arrows to knock things away. You can simply tap it to knock everything away from you. You have Evasive Maneuvers, Stealth, and Threat Wipe. You have the knockback on Retaliation, which it's funny to look at, but I don't know how useful it is. I would probably just go with rank 3 instead. You have the Stun from Sonic Aero, which is, especially while leveling, it's really pretty good. I would go with that for leveling, maybe. Even if you didn't put any advantage points in it, because you tend to drop it later. But it's still a good power to use, just for the crowd controlling, or the stun. And of course, you can fly above everything, since your powers are all 100 feet, and quite a few of the mobs are incredibly stupid, so you can simply fly outside of their range and attack them, and not have to worry about dying. Especially, since so many of the mobs are melee only, totally take advantage of their inability to attack you. And some of them, quite a few of them, don't have any attacks outside 50 feet. So even you can just fly above 50 feet to not be damaged by so many enemies. Which means you could essentially tank a whole bunch of stuff that you might not normally be able to tank, even without a healer. And of course there are still cons for this archetype. There is a cooldown on Rain of Arrows, and that makes me sad. Yes, it's a really low cooldown, and with high intelligence it doesn't really matter too terribly, because you can simply do a Rain of Arrows, Explosive Arrows rotation, which is high damage. But it still makes me sad that there's a cooldown on Rain of Arrows. It's really minor. Like most archetypes, there's more powers than you'll need. I don't like to have a whole bunch of powers within my character. I like to focus on a few powers and make builds around those few powers. And having like all these extra damage dealing powers, I don't use them all. I mean, not that they're bad, it's just there's too many for my taste. I don't see people using every single one of these powers all the time, and some of them are situational and not necessarily needed. Gas Arrow versus Storm of Arrows. I'm pretty sure Gas Arrow has always sucked. In fact, Gas Arrow is only good on Divana Hawk, especially over Storm of Arrows. Storm of Arrows is always going to be better than Gas Arrow. Even if you just like tap Storm of Arrows for the rotation, it's still better than Gas Arrow. Focus Shot is not as good as the Sniper Rifle counterpart. It does less damage, which is sad, even though they're both 120-foot powers and they're both essentially the same thing. If you don't plan to go into something like Fire and Ice or Gravitar, I would probably go Snapshot over Focus Shot. But if you don't use Snapshot anyway, then you might as well take Focus Shot just in case you do change your mind and be like, you know what, I feel like trying out some Fire and Ice but I don't have to worry about Frosty hitting me in the face with an ice dagger. Just keep in mind that Blaze can still hit you at 120 feet with her attacks. And if you decide to go full glass cannon and rip out all your Constitution mods, that's something to keep in mind. You cannot tank Blaze from 120 feet. It does not work. I don't know how far her powers go, but they definitely will hit you at 120 feet. You're still squishy. Even if you have, decent health, you're going to be squishy, which this is a damage-dealing archetype. It's not a freeform, and it's good within its role. So that's just something you have to deal with. And of course, there's no self-healing. You are going to have to rely on healing patches from vendors, which sucks, but it's not too terribly bad. You'll probably still want some Constitution. You can go the full class cannon experience and just, be like, I'm going to have 4 intelligence mods and 2 ego mods, and that's just the way it is, and screw Constitution. I'm just going to, take advantage of my range. You could do that too. Depends on what you want. You probably could do Gravitar without Constitution. As long as you stay pretty close to 120 feet, you'll still be affected by the gravity well, and you'll absolutely have to block during that and keep trying to fly up, because you guaranteed are going to get hit by at least 1 or 2 gravity cascades to the face. But if you're flying up, hopefully it just knocks you back and doesn't kill you flat out. If you're blocking, it shouldn't. All of your powers are 100 feet except your energy builder. That really sucks, especially since it's not necessarily easy to be self-sustaining build. It's just kind of like, what? I don't know, it's just weird. I know all energy builders are 50 feet, but honestly, considering every power in this power set is 100 feet, the energy builder should be as well. Combat training kind of sucks. I was disappointed. I thought that maybe trying to go with high offense instead of crit chance in my gear would be, an interesting choice, but I think I would just rather go with the crit chance, and would be better for me. Wouldn't give me higher crit chance in the long run, so that's kind of disappointing. Brush It Off, as far as I can tell, is also broken. So if you're thinking, hey, an extra 10% chance to dodge, area effects like gravity cascade, well, as far as I can tell, it does not work. There was testing done on the forums, and the consensus is that it does nothing. That's disappointing. It's not necessarily something bad on the archetype, but it does affect survivability of it, and considering this is a heavily glass cannon style archetype, that really sucks that you don't have that little bit of extra survivability, especially since you're probably going to have some dodge from quarry, even if you choose to invest your gear into defense. Overall, I would say that the Marksman is an excellent archetype, probably biased there, but when Sturga was a Marksman, I did take her into the first round of Fire and Ice rotations, and the damage parser showed her doing damage on par with, everyone else. It wasn't the highest. That was taken by, I'm pretty sure it was a Lightning Arc build. Lightning Arc is really high damage. It wasn't that much lower, though. I think the Sturga was like 13% of the damage, and the Lightning Arc was 19%, so it was still nice and up there, and the only thing I was using was the Explosive Arrow with advantage and Rain of Arrows. I pretty much at that point had dropped my rotation down to those 2 powers. I wasn't using Straight Shot anymore because I was just too lazy to do that. I didn't want to have a ton of powers and whatever. Anyway. And actually, the damage parser is on the forum somewhere in one of the Rampage threads. Even though archery powers are not as good as quite a few of the other damage dealing sets, you could still put out some respectable damage, especially if you focus on powers and really build around them. And of course, you have the option to be an excellent sniper with your 100-foot powers, even if you use Focus Shot for its 120-foot power advantage. Since there's only 2 of them, even though it's not as good as Sniper Rifle, it's still a good choice if you don't trust your Frosty tank. Or if you just, want to have that extra bit of survivability since most mobs are not going to hit you at 120 feet. Although it does require you to be at pretty much exactly 120 feet for it to work. The closer you are to 100 feet, some mobs can hit you just outside 100 foot. Yeah, maybe I'm biased because I really like this archetype because I love Rain of Arrows. It's like one of my favorite powers, and if it didn't have a cooldown, it would be like the best power in the entire game. Well, maybe. It's still a pretty cool power. It, of course, is not good with the survivability necessarily, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to be a damage-dealing archetype, and it does that well.